This morning, you got dressed without thinking about it. You pulled on a shirt, you stepped into pants, you laced up your shoes and walked out the door, and at no point did you stop to ask why any of it was necessary. But the real answer is far stranger than a closet full of habits. For nearly all of human history, your body wore nothing at all. No fur, no fabric, no protection from the cold except your own skin. Somewhere around 1 million years ago, your ancestors lost the thick coat of hair that still covers almost every other primate on Earth. They became the naked ape long before they became the clothed one. What could possibly make a trade like that worth it? Heat is the answer. Not fashion, not modesty, heat. Almost every large mammal on the savanna wears a coat of fur. Lions wear it. Antelope wear it. Even the other great apes wear it. Your ancestors are the strange exception, the one hairless primate in a world of hairy ones. That should bother you a little. Evolution rarely strips away a feature unless keeping it costs more than losing it. Your early ancestors were hunting under the African sun, chasing prey for miles across open ground until the animal simply gave out from heat exhaustion. A thick coat of fur traps heat against the skin. Trapped heat kills a body that is running. So natural selection stripped the fur away and multiplied the number of sweat glands across bare skin instead, turning your ancestors into some of the most efficient heat-dumping runners the planet has ever produced. You could chase an animal for hours under a blazing sun because you could cool down and it could not. Losing your fur was not a weakness, it was a hunting weapon, but naked skin that sheds heat brilliantly under an equatorial sun becomes a death sentence somewhere colder. And your ancestors did not stay where it was warm. They kept walking out of Africa and into landscapes that had never once been kind to a hairless body. So when did the naked ape start covering itself back up? For a long time, nobody could actually answer that question with any precision. Cloth does not fossilize. A hide wrap or a stitched garment rots away within decades, leaving nothing behind for an archaeologist to dig up thousands of years later. Researchers were left guessing at the age of a technology that had almost no physical trace. Then a geneticist named David Reed at the University of Florida realized the answer was not buried in the ground at all. It had been crawling on human bodies the entire time. You carry two kinds of lice, and they are not the same creature having a bad day. Head lice and body lice are two branches of a single species that split apart and specialized. Head lice cling to hair. Body lice, on the other hand, evolved to grip the fibers of clothing instead, laying their eggs in the seams of fabric rather than in strands of hair. That means body lice could not have existed until clothing did. There was nowhere for them to live. By sequencing the DNA of both louse lineages and measuring how long ago they diverged from a shared ancestor, Reed's team calculated a window. Somewhere between roughly 83,000 and 170,000 years ago, humans started wearing clothes regularly enough to hand a parasite an entirely new habitat. Sit with that for a second. The proof of one of your species' most important inventions was not found in a museum. It was found on a bug. Reed was not the first scientist to try this approach. Back in 2003, a geneticist named Mark Stoneking at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig ran an earlier version of the same experiment and landed on a more recent estimate, somewhere around 107,000 years ago. The exact number is still debated between research teams, but both studies point toward the same startling gap in your family history. Humans spent hundreds of thousands of years completely hairless and completely uncovered before clothing existed in any form. Picture the scale of that gap. Your ancestors lost their fur roughly 1 million years ago. They did not start covering themselves again until somewhere close to 170,000 years ago at the very earliest. That leaves a stretch of time that could span 800,000 years or more, where humans were simply cold, with bare skin, and no covering of any kind. How did anyone survive that long without an answer? Fire helped. Caves and rock shelters helped. Huddling together at night helped. But none of it was clothing, and none of it could travel with a body the way a hide draped over the shoulders eventually could. The timing is the real clue. Clothing arrives right around the moment your species needed it most, as the ice ages tightened their grip on the planet. An archaeologist named Ian Gilligan at the University of Sydney spent years building what he calls a thermal model for the origin of clothing. His argument is refreshingly simple. Clothes did not appear because somebody had a clever idea one afternoon. They appeared because a changing climate forced the issue. As the planet slid deeper into glacial cold, humans pushing into higher latitudes had a body built for sprinting across a hot savanna, not for surviving a European winter. Something had to change, and it was not going to be your biology. It was going to be your behavior. Gilligan draws a distinction that is easy to miss. Simple clothing and complex clothing are not the same invention. Simple clothing is a hide draped over the shoulders and tied at the waist. It keeps you warmer, but that is all it does. Complex clothing is fitted. It is layered, cut into shaped pieces, and sewn together using needles, tracking the contours of the actual body wearing it. That second kind of clothing shows up later in the archaeological record, and its traces line up almost perfectly with the coldest, harshest stretches of the ice ages. When the climate warms, the evidence for tailored clothing fades. When brutal cold returns, it comes roaring back. One of the clearest fingerprints of that shift is a single object pulled from Denisova Cave in Siberia. Archaeologists there found a needle carved from bird bone, roughly 7 centimeters long, with a small eye drilled through one end for thread. It is estimated to be about 50,000 years old, making it the oldest known sewing needle on the planet. Whoever shaped that needle was not draping a hide over their shoulders and hoping for the best. They were tailoring. Here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Modern humans were not the only ones facing that same Ice Age cold. Neanderthals lived through it too, across the same frozen stretches of Europe and Asia, for tens of thousands of years. Gilligan's research suggests that Neanderthals likely relied mostly on simple draped hides, while modern humans developed fitted, tailored clothing using tools like that Siberian needle. A drape lets cold air leak in at every gap. A tailored seam does not. Some researchers now wonder whether that difference in clothing technology helped tip the balance during the final, coldest millennia when Neanderthals disappeared and modern humans did not. Could a sewn seam really have been part of what decided which human species made it into the present? Nobody claims clothing alone explains an extinction that complicated. But it is a strange thing to realize that something as ordinary as a needle and thread might sit somewhere on the list of reasons you exist and a close cousin species does not. There is another layer to this that rarely makes it into the story. Long before clothing was tailored for warmth, humans were already marking their bodies for reasons that had nothing to do with survival. Ochre pigment and pierced shell beads show up at sites in Africa tens of thousands of years before that Siberian needle was ever carved, evidence that your ancestors were decorating and covering themselves symbolically well before they were doing it purely to stay alive. Warmth may have forced the invention, meaning got attached to it almost immediately afterward, and it never really let go. And once clothing existed, it did not just keep individual humans warm, it changed where an entire species could survive. A naked human, however clever, cannot last through an Ice Age winter in Northern Europe or Siberia. Clothing was the technology that turned an equatorial ape into a creature capable of walking into the Arctic Circle and staying alive there. Every migration into a colder region during the last Ice Age was riding on the back of animal hide and sinew thread, stitched together in the dark by firelight, and yet almost none of it survives. Not one complete piece of Ice Age clothing has ever been recovered intact. Everything you know about it comes from indirect evidence. A bone needle here, a scraping tool there, a Parasites DN, quietly whispering a date from deep in the past. Your ancestors built one of the most consequential technologies in the history of the species, and it vanished so completely that for most of scientific history, nobody even knew where to start looking for it. So think again about this morning. About the shirt you pulled on without a second thought, the shoes you laced without considering what they were actually for. You were not performing some hollow modern ritual invented by a clothing brand. You were repeating an act your ancestors invented under existential pressure, refined across repeated ice ages, and carried with them into every freezing landscape they crossed on foot. The zipper is new. The fabric blend is new. The instinct underneath it is not new at all. Even the parts of getting dressed that feel purely social, choosing a color, matching an outfit, dressing for how you want to be seen, sit on top of a foundation that was never about being seen at all. That foundation was about not dying of exposure on a Pleistocene winter night. The meaning came later. The need for the fabric itself came first, and it came from a place far more desperate than a mirror. Every time you reach for a jacket before stepping outside, you are running a piece of behavior that is at least 100,000 years old and quite possibly closer to 170,000. It was written by Cold. It was tested by extinction, both the ones your ancestors survived and the ones their cousins did not. And it was passed down so completely that you never even notice you are using it. This morning, you got dressed without thinking about it. Now you know exactly why that silence is the whole point. It means the invention still works.